Today's video is a slow practice tutorial. I'm going to take you through 6 different examples of slow practice to help give you ideas on how you can use slow practice in your own work to make rapid progress at the piano. I'm Dr. Kate Boyd. Welcome to the Piano Prof. I'm so glad you're here. If you're all about slow practice today, keep watching, give this video a thumbs up, and let's get started. This is a follow-up I made to a video about slow practice, where I talked about the pitfalls of doing too little slow playing and the pitfalls of doing too much slow playing in your practice sessions. When I was working on that video, I realized that in my own practice, I use slow practice in different contexts and for different reasons. It turns out that slow practice is not a blanket practice strategy that you can use for every context, but it really is context dependent. It just depends on what you're trying to do in your specific practice session. And so I came up with a list of 6 different contexts where I use slow practice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through all 6 contexts. I'm going to show you a little practice example of each one. The first context to use slow practice is perhaps the most obvious one, and that's when you're learning a new piece. When we start a new piece that's technically challenging, it's totally necessary to practice slowly because it is literally impossible to play it fast with any accuracy at all. So for my demonstration, I'm going to show you how I tackle a brand new section of a piece that I'm currently learning. Now I'm going to show you how I apply that to my own practicing with just a little snippet of a practice example. This is from a piece I'm currently working on, the Dutilleux Sonata, and this is partway through the first movement. This is measure 77. This is a place where I'm going to just do a little bit of slow practice modeling to show how I would use it to learn notes. So at this stage, I go ahead and I hesitate in order to get over a note so I don't actually make a mistake. At the very, very early stage, it's okay to play a little bit out of tempo. The second context to use slow practice is when you're learning a technically difficult spot. This is related to my previous point, but the difference is that you might have the whole piece or movement up to tempo or close to tempo, but there's just that one spot that's still bugging you. The takeaway here is you don't want to take the whole thing super slow if there are only a few spots that are the problems. It's much more effective to isolate those technical spots and practice them slowly. What you need to do is figure out how you're going to need to move in order to play that spot accurately and up to tempo. In this example from Beethoven's Violin Sonata number 10 in the last movement, I can play the whole first page without any problem fast. But the second page I'm seeing, this is measure 33, that there are a lot of jumps, and I can play these individual things pretty well. I can play, and I can play this, right? And so it's a waste of time for me to go. The problem is the jumps. So I'm going to practice it this way. And then find it. And then find it. Find it. Find it. Giving myself lots of time. And then I'm going to play that several times in a row and make those gaps shorter until I can just go right there. I won't bore you with that extra practice, but that's what I would do at the next stage of this. The third context to use slow practice is for correcting errors. Sometimes you just need to change something in a piece you've been working on. Maybe you learned a wrong note and you need to correct it. Or you need to change your fingering because the fingering you've been using just doesn't work for you anymore. I learned once somewhere, and I really wish I could remember the source, that there was a research study done on learning, and it takes something like 7 to 10 correct repetitions in order to learn something correctly if you repeat it correctly all those times in a row. But if you've learned something incorrectly and you need to fix it, it takes something like 30 or 40 correct repetitions to fix it. Slow practice is especially important in this context because if you're correcting something, you don't want to make any errors when you're fixing it. In this example from the Toccata movement of the Bach E minor Partita, I learned the fingering wrong in measure 39, and so I'm going to fix it. So this is how I would go about fixing it. I know it wrong, and I need to do a whole bunch of repetitions to make it correct. So first thing I'm going to do is very carefully, I make sure that's where, and then I'm going to write it in. All right, so I'll do that several times, making sure it's, then I'll add the left hand slowly, and I'll do that a couple times, and then I'll go back and do this a few times. And then I'll go back a couple beats and play it in context. And I'll do that a few times, and I'll keep going back until I can incorporate it, making sure that every time I get to that spot, I'm doing the corrected fingering. The fourth context to use slow practice is to enhance musicality. Slow practice is key to improving your musicality in working on a piece because it allows you to really take time to listen and observe all of the markings the composer wrote in the score. I think that this is the type of slow practice that a lot of teachers are referring to when they ask students to practice slowly. A lot of times teachers ask students to practice slowly when they feel that the student is missing a lot of the details in the score. This kind of slow practice is best done when you've basically learned a piece and you already know all the notes, rhythms, and fingerings, and you can play it at a steady tempo, even if it's not up to the full tempo. To do this kind of slow practice, go at about 50 or 60% of your planned tempo, and this really does depend on the context. This is just where you need to be self-aware and assess your own playing. As you practice, notice all of the markings and the phrasings that you want to do and make sure that you're following and practicing all of them. In this example, I'm going to practice a very small snippet of Pagodes by Debussy from his Estampe. Normally, I would apply this practice technique to a larger section, but for the sake of time in this video, so you don't have to sit and watch me practice for too long, I'm going to do just a tiny snippet. And so this is measure 23, and I can already play it fairly well, but what I'm really going for here is to go for the legato. I want the left hand to come out slightly, and I want to do the hairpin that's printed in the score. Plus, I want to achieve a pianissimo dynamic. So. So I would do that, and then I would assess, am I following the directions in the score? And if I'm not, then I would, pay attention to that, and I would go and repeat the little spot a few times and try to get the whole thing under control at a slow tempo so that then I can speed it up and feel comfortable in my interpretation at a faster tempo. The fifth context to do slow practice is in performance preparation. Too often I hear the results of students learning to play a piece quickly, and then they never or rarely end up playing it slower again. Playing something at a slow tempo is not something that you graduate from in the process of learning a piece. In effective practicing, there's a constant back and forth between testing something out at tempo and doing slower practice to shore things up. This application of slow practice is when you'll practice hearing things and really making sure you're physically getting where you need to go. I'm actually not going to do a practice example of this because it would just take way too long to show you, because it does involve playing all the way through a piece or a movement. But to use slow practice in performance preparation, I recommend the following 3-step plan. The first step is play a piece at performance tempo and record the playthrough. The second step is to listen back to your playthrough and mark all the things that you want to work on. Then go back and practice the piece slowly, working through the list of things that you wrote down that you want to work on under tempo. The sixth context to do slow practice is when you're maintaining and deepening your interpretation of a piece. A lot of people are surprised to learn that it's actually important to keep doing slow practice after you've learned a piece, and even after you've performed it if you want to keep it in your repertoire. This is one place where slow motion practice can be extremely helpful. When you do slow motion practice, you do all the motions that you do at the piano, but they're smooth and slow and unbroken motions. Slow motion practice allows you to experience and streamline all the musical details and physical motions it takes to play your piece. One important aspect of slow motion practice is the mental component. It takes a lot of concentration to do this kind of work because you're slowing everything down inside your head too, and hearing everything in a smooth and connected way. And to me, when I'm doing that work, it feels like taffy, or like I'm pulling chewing gum. Everything just feels very stretchy. In this example, I'm going to do slow motion practice on a piece that I've already performed and that I know pretty well, and that is the air movement from Bach's E minor Partita. So this is what I'll do. I'm going to try to move very fluid motions, and then anytime my hand moves or shifts position, I'm going to go there in a direct, non-jerky way. So it would look like this. Etc. And honestly, when I do slow motion, sometimes I even go slower than that, just so I can hear the space between all of the notes, so I can really listen for the intervals and how the notes move from one to another. That is how you really can create a feeling of ease in your performance, especially if you combine that with practicing at tempo. Practicing too fast too much of the time and practicing too slowly too much of the time stem from the same problem, which is not listening to yourself enough. It's easy to practice in a hectic way that's entirely driven by the fingers, where you're not listening to yourself to the point where you don't even notice wrong notes. It's also easy to just do a bunch of slow drills and sort of space out and stop listening. So those were 6 contexts that you can use slow practice in your own playing. What were they again? The first was learning a new piece. The second was learning a technically difficult spot. The third was correcting errors. The fourth was enhancing musicality. The fifth was preparing for a performance. And the sixth was maintaining and deepening your interpretation. Which of these 6 slow practice strategies are you going to try? Let me know in the comments. While you're waiting for my next video, you can check out a couple of my other videos about practicing here and here. Have a great week and happy slow practicing.